All right, welcome to OCWG meeting number 19, where we're talking about the OCIF specification. We were just discussing contributors and authors and kind of clarifying that in the specification. So, and I think we have a couple of topics to talk about today, and then we can go ahead and get into it. So the main one for me is I left a bunch of feedback on the 0.3 draft PR. Do we want to go through that? Have you had a chance to look at it? Did you have any questions? That
Yeah, I haven't looked through it yet.
Okay. Well, I think most of it is pretty clear. There was a couple of things that bore talking about. Most of it is just kind of nitpicky, like you missed a thing here, you left 0.2 instead of 0.3. It's like really small little tweaks. Let me go ahead and share my screen real quick. I think this is the draft. Um, so the main one that I wanted to discuss was arrows. Let's see if I can find.
We said we wanted to add a way that the arrow can point to its visual node, which
Yeah,
represents it. Yeah, that's just missing currently, I would say.
cool.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
we
just
should
wanted,
add it
yeah.
now.
Okay, cool. So that was, I didn't know if you had purposefully left it out or if it was just overlooked.
Oh, I think we forgot it.
Yeah, cool. I'm totally fine with that being the answer. Um, yeah, so then we would have start and end XY locations, and then we would have a start marker and end marker, which I want to talk about, and then a start node and end node, which would be an ID of a node that it's pointing to optionally.
Well, we need a third thing, like the arrow itself. We also need to be able to point to the arrow, right?
Point to the arrow.
The arrow is a visual thing. The arrow itself is already the visual node. So the
Yeah.
arrow contains as a, so where actually is the, what if we have some cool looking arrow, like a freehand drawing, which is
Mhm.
visually the arrow, then yeah, that won't work.
I'm not following what you're saying there. What if we have if we have a freehand arrow?
Yeah, freehand arrow just wouldn't work with our arrow.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah,
So,
we're
so
basically
our
saying, and
arrow is something.
we're not
Sorry.
specifying a middle anchor point either. We're basically saying an arrow is a straight line between 2 points. That's it. There is no way
Yeah.
to, and I think that's actually what we should do, honestly, because every infinite canvas that I've seen represents the ways that you can reshape an arrow differently. So like TL draw and Excala draw have an incompatible system for drawing an arrow with a midpoint. Like TL draw only allows you to grab the middle, and you can only drag it off perpendicular. Whereas like TL draw, Excala draw, you can drag the point anywhere, and it will redraw through that point. Um, but you're on a perpendicular line. It's kind of interesting the way that TL draw made that choice of like you're on the midpoint perpendicular to the line is the only way you can drag the anchor. Um, but I think because there's so many different ways to do it, the simplest way is just to say arrows go from here to there. And if you want to do something more complicated than that, then you need an extension.
Yeah.
Uh,
But should the relation, the edge relation, should that be able to point to an arrow, link to an arrow, just like you link to
That's
a
a good
start and
point.
end node? But you can also,
Yeah,
but you can,
yes, that's a nice idea.
yep. And you're saying the link should go from the relation to the arrow, Michael, as opposed to
yeah,
from the arrow to the relation.
yeah, because the relation also links the start and end node. So then could make
Ah,
sense to Yeah, also do that.
I see. I see. Right. So yeah, in the relations section, it's not a set, it's just a relation. But no, wait. Set, group,
The
edge.
edge relation. Yeah. Okay. So we have
Yeah.
from,
Great.
to, directed, and relation type. So we would want to point to a visual node visually representing the relation. How do we call that? Visual?
Arrow.
Or
Does
node,
that do node? Yeah,
Yeah.
just node. Yeah.
right? Because elements, relations are technically not nodes, right? So I think we're using this term node to mean visual nodes. It's like a shorthand for it.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, so it's something, I think if it's not node, if the property's name isn't node itself, it should be something that contains node, like node pointer or node, ref node or something like that. Like you could do like that. Or node ref or something.
I think node is good.
Node is
Yeah,
fine, I
I think so as well.
think it's consistent with the rest of the spec, where we tend to truncate names generally and not really spell them out very long. Add not truncate, but we try to keep them terse. Add an optional pointer to a visual node that visualizes that represents the relation visually. I guess you're taking notes here, but I'll just add a comment here so that we make sure that it gets merged in before
Yep.
we addressed before we merge it in. That's a great point, Michael. So then
Should we
arrow,
then
yeah, go ahead.
remove start node and end node from the arrow, or do we have a redundant way to specify that?
Yeah,
My thinking on this is that some canvases will ignore relations largely when they do an export and will focus on nodes instead. That isn't what we would necessarily want, but I think that is realistically will happen. And so giving a place for that to happen in the arrow makes sense to me, even though, like you point out, Max, it is redundant.
yeah. If we put it only in the relation, then we force to applications to use relations more.
Yeah,
True.
I also feel that way.
Could be good. I hear you.
But how does an arrow have a start and an end point? Yes, it does.
It does, yeah. So you don't have to point to a specific node. I'm sorry, points are here.
Yeah,
We already
yeah.
have an XY location. Is that OCF
Yeah.
type, right? Yeah, it is. Yeah. It's an array of numbers. Okay.
In Code for Canvas,
Oh,
I
no,
have a
that's
similar
not right.
issue, I think.
No, it should be a coordinate or something like that.
Coordinate, yeah.
I think these are only used when an arrow has no relation. When it's just a free arrow on the canvas, then you
Right.
use the start and end point. I think in most other situations, if there's a relation, then you use the nodes positions. I think.
Well, I think we discussed that we want the start and end point to be required, and so that the arrow can actually be drawn
Yeah, exactly.
always. I mean, that is another kind of redundancy, but this makes the arrow a standalone geometric object. Just goes from a point to a point.
Yeah, that's true.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for canvases that don't support arrows pointing to nodes, I think it's important to have the start and end, like you pointed out, they're required here.
Yeah, yeah, that's for sure true. Yeah, and also in my own situation, I always write the coordinates of the start and end point, even if the nodes are connected.
Yeah.
Then I
I
just
agree.
use the X and Y
It also
position
is
from the
kind of like
node.
a poor man's version of the ports extension, right? You can say, I'm linking it to this node. This arrow links these two different nodes, and here's the point at which it comes into the node, right? Without having to
Yeah,
use ports or anything fancy there, you can at least get the arrow going to the right spot on the
yeah,
object.
yeah.
So no, I think this is the set.
Yeah.
I think the redundancy is okay.
So you would
Um,
like to have start node and end node additionally.
I
I
think I
would,
slightly prefer that, as it it lets people write a more terse version of the spec and doesn't require them to use relations and have
but
that
then we
indirect.
also need to explain then how they should use the relation, the edge. Should you usually have an arrow accompanied by an edge, and then, or
Yeah.
should you never use edges, or what are these edges for? If I already have the start node and end node in the arrow, should I then also have the arrow relation type in the arrow to make it easier?
You mean point to the relation from the arrow node? Is that what you're saying?
Copy everything from the edge relation into the arrow node,
I see what
sort
you
of.
mean. Yeah, I got you.
Or I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of that redundancy with the nodes,
Yeah.
with having a
No.
start node and an end node in the arrow. The points start and end points. That's I agree with that, but for sure.
Okay.
But
No,
I
I
don't
think
know.
I guess you're right. So relations being a more conceptual object, relations being about the conceptual information on the canvas that's not necessarily visual, may be visual, but isn't necessarily visual. The points give you the spot to draw the arrow from and to in
Yeah,
the start and end in the node. And then the relation, the optional relation, gives you the ability to say it relates to these two nodes. And then you can also say whether it's directed or undirected. Okay, I'm with you there. I
What
think I can.
about what about a field relation where the arrow can point to the ID of the relation it represents so that it's double linked?
Right. I do. That was one of my practical concerns here, is that you would have to scan the entire relations node from an implementation standpoint. You'd have to scan the entire relations node looking for a backlink to the node that you're referring to in order to know which visual nodes it relates to. And that the other thing is that there's a difference. The other thing it's confusing is in the relation it's called from and to, and in the arrow it's called start and end. And is from start and to end? I think it is, but there's like
Yeah,
some mapping that you have to do in your brain
yeah,
between those two. Perhaps we should choose start and end to align with that.
yeah, yeah. Start and end is probably the clearest
Yeah,
terminology we have.
I think so.
yeah,
And then at least it aligns with arrow. Um,
So from is the start and to is the end. And then we have start, end, directed, rel, and node. And
mhm.
what about the the link from the arrow to the edge?
Yeah, which way should the link go? Or should it
Why
be
not?
doubly linked? There's a little bit of weirdness here in that if we link from the arrow to the if we link from the node to the relation, multiple nodes could link to the same relation, which may be good or may be bad. And similarly, if you link from
Mhm.
the relation to the node. No, you only get one option there. The relation can only point to a single node.
But multiple relations can point to the same node.
Say that again. I'm sorry. I'm
If
thinking.
we have a field and multiple edges would use the same node ID.
Oh, yes, you could have multiple relations all pointing to the same arrow.
Yeah.
You're right. One thing we've thought about in the past is when you delete a specific thing on the canvas, what else should be deleted, like cascading deletes. What are our we can't control that, but we can recommend what our advised cascading delete strategy would be here. And so maybe this is a case where the pointer should be on the arrow side. The pointer should be on the node side to the relation so that you can delete the associated relation when you delete the arrow. But the danger is there if you've got multiple arrows pointing to that same relation and you cascade the delete, then you've removed it. Whereas, yeah, if you make it doubly linked, then it's a 1-to-1, right?
Not necessarily, only if you do it right. You can even do even more horrible things. What is it that we want to express? So we have on the relations side an abstract edge that says these concepts are related. Then visually we have an arrow going from an XY position to another XY position, showing something very visual. And then these two things can be related. Is there ever a good reason to have not a one-on-one relation? Can you have multiple arrows representing the same edge? Or can you have several edges for the same arrow? No, I mean, it's really one-to-one.
It is 1-to-1.
Yeah.
So now we should talk about deletion semantics. Does it make sense to delete the visual thing and keep the structural one, or vice versa? And maybe the structural thing feels a bit more fundamental than the visual thing. But usually deleting one should probably delete the other one as well. So maybe double linking them and writing in the spec, these should point to each other is the way to go.
I think so. And it is somewhat redundant, but it actually is implementation. At least for the reading part of the spec, maybe not the writing part of the spec. The writing part, you have to remember to update both places in parallel. So there's some like burden on the author, the implementer, to keep those links aligned. But it really does make it easier if you're reading the spec to say, here's an arrow. Where is the associated relation? And I can follow the link from there and without having to scan the entire bag of relations.
Yeah, I think it really expresses that concept of the arrow and the relation. That's if you have that link, a bidirectional link.
And we call that relation, the property on the arrow.
If we're going to call it node on the relation, then we should call it relation on the node.
Yeah.
Okay. And both are optional, and if one is given, the other one from the other side should be present as well.
Correct. Yeah.
And the deletion semantics are delete both. Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Good. I like that. Moving, representing the start. I'm just doing this for my own accounting of comments here on the relation. You've got the bulk of the, actually, I want to do it as a reply. Can I do that? I don't want to,
maybe you can edit your own.
That's right. My friend
Markers.
Rob implemented that, by the way, and I still give him crap about that. I'm like, why are there two options here? Like, what do I want to do? Anyway, so all right. Well, were you going to bring something up, Max, before we
Yeah,
move
the
on?
markers, start marker and end marker, because
Great.
that's something that Michael and I discussed last second in another meeting when we two were left. So if you have a visual arrow, you want to see where is it actually pointing? Is it from A to B or from B to A, or is it connecting both ways? So we decided, yeah, we have for both ends this decision about the pointiness of the arrow encoded somehow.
Right.
So you need like 3 visual styles. Is the arrow actually, is it going from the thing into the arrow here, or is it coming out of the arrow, or is there no direction?
Right.
And then that
So
allows
the
to
two that I
represent
feel
all
very
combinations.
confident, the two that I feel very confident in
Yeah, these are the common ones.
are that there is nothing and there
Yeah,
is an arrow.
yeah.
Those two, this incoming one, I was kind of like, I get what you're saying, but I don't even know that is. I'm trying to think of canvases that visualize changing the arrow tip to represent that. I don't know. Um,
Maybe it's over the top, but yeah, it has a certain consistent feel to it.
I get that, especially since you have outgoing as the name for arrow. I would probably just call them none and arrowhead or arrowhead. I think that's the common name for these things. They're called arrowheads. And then leave the idea of outgoing and coming because these are semantic, right? As opposed to visual.
Um,
They're
yeah,
not, you're not actually calling this the visual. No one calls this thing an outgoing, right?
yeah.
You're saying when you have an outgoing, then it should be an arrowhead. I think that's too prescriptive. I feel like it should just be this is an arrowhead. Now, granted,
So
we're probably going to fail to satisfy just about everyone by giving them only, no end marker and arrow end marker. That's it. That's the only two. And then how you represent the arrow, totally up to you. But it seems like every infinite canvas probably does this differently. And so this is another case where like if you want to really control the arrow head, you need an extension.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm fine with that. Let's simplify so we only have 2 options and it's easier to understand. I fully agree.
Yeah, agree too.
Cool. Or is it all one word? I don't know. Google can probably tell us. I'll say perhaps. Cool. I think those were the only two that comments that I had that were actually questions more than comments.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we just discussed that. The section. Yeah, that was just noting that we're out of date, some formatting changes. And then let me look through this. Yeah, everything else is just comments. Or like formatting type stuff. What else do you guys want to discuss? We have a few minutes left.
Yeah, I had also 2 comments, questions. One of them is already answered. It's with the edge and the arrow discussion we had. But the other one was about the type names for all of the node types and relation types. I'm not sure they are consistent yet in the spec and
I think
the
you had
schemas.
found a bug on one of them, which I fixed already. At least the one
Okay.
you mentioned in the comments.
It's the direct, about direct.
Which type?
Rect node.
Rect. Okay, got it.
There were references to rect node and OCWG /node/rect. Yeah.
The
You
JSON
click on
file or the here?
click on that rect node.json.
Got it.
I think there in
Yeah,
the title I had oval node or something like this, but it's fixed now.
Great. Okay.
but that title, is that the name of the type or just something
Oh,
description?
well, semantically speaking, the name of the type is defined in the schema that uses the type. We can just propose nice default names. Oh, now we can define built-in names, so maybe they do matter more. I think the spec has a section on the built-in names or something like this. Yeah, built-in schema entries. It's called in the spec in the appendix at the end. Further
Mappings.
down, yeah, this one.
Okay.
And there we propose a built-in mapping from type names
Yeah.
to these JSON schemas. And these URIs actually define which type is really meant. And then this built-in schema entry is a common short name so that users can refer to it.
These names is what we should use in the nodes if you have not a different,
Yes.
not a default type, but something different.
Yeah. And then these known extensions, they are also proposed names, but they carry a version identifier in the name so that they might evolve differently. And the built-in schema entries always evolve together with the core spec. So if the core spec is 0.3, all these types are also 0.3 and cannot change independently. That was sort of what we defined how core and extensions differ. So they don't need a version identifier on their own. They have the same version as the spec they are used in.
Got it.
At least this is my proposal. I mean, we have not discussed this part a lot.
So then the nice thing about this is I could write, OCWG node arrow without having to include the spec,
Yeah.
the schema in the schemas.
Yeah.
No, I like that a lot. And it really does give this kind of, here are the kind of core things that you're going to need. And if you need those, then the schemas are already defined outside of this file. So they can be defined in this file. I like that. It's valid to additionally copy in this block. You can also copy in these schemas into the schema section. That would be valid as well. But yeah, that makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Michael, were you were referring to the file rect node and talking about the title in there? Were you expecting it to look like this? I mean, like this, OCWG node/rect instead of rect-node, I think is what it was called.
Yeah, maybe. I'm not, yeah.
I guess you were, and then Max, you were going based on this, I guess, rect-node.json, and so you called it rect-node.
I just gave it any pragmatic title that sort of identifies it. I haven't thought much about it.
Okay.
And
Yeah,
I think
but
our spec doesn't say much about how the title should be.
Entries. Let's see, an object representing a schema entry. Schemas have a URI, a schema, a location, and a name.
Title is completely freeform.
Okay.
And until now, I mean, we can change, but
yeah,
maybe
I
it
think it's
helps
fine.
if the title is more formal.
Why is the title there at all? Because JSON schema requires it?
Because it was allowed. I thought it was good to see in the file what you have. I don't know.
Gotcha. So it's like duplicating the file name is kind of what you were thinking, but if you catted the file or whatever, you don't by looking at the file's contents what it's called.
Yeah, exactly. That was
So there really is no name in the name mapping happens to occur in outside of the file itself. Interesting.
Yeah, I mean the thing is the URIs identify the type.
Mhm.
They are the unique key. And the local names are just shorthands within the user's file to make it easier if you want.
Yeah, pet names like we talked about. You can rename it
Yeah.
to what it maps
I
onto
think we
that
just,
without having to have a global namespace.
Maybe it makes
I think
sense to also call it add OCWG slash
I
rect
think so.
slash node, exactly like the user is
I think so.
yeah,
expecting
it is
it.
maybe less confusing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So less confusing is always good.
Yeah, exactly.
We probably
And
also just need
that's good
more
too because
examples
it
where
gives
we,
us a way to when people are writing the schema files for extensions, we can encourage them to use that title as well of like use your organization name, you know, and then the fully qualified schema name. I guess the one thing we'll need to indicate, Max, is that it is optional. Like you can, there's nothing, we're not validating that title.
yeah. And we also need more examples in this spec, I think.
Oh
or
boy. Yeah,
in
boy,
the
do we.
REPL.
Yeah,
That's,
maybe we should
that really helps.
put them in the cookbook, or I mean, to blow the spec by too many examples is also
Yeah, true.
True. I definitely, there were definitely,
or
and I think I
primer.
tried to, well, I tried to note these spots in the spec that while I was reading the spec, who knows the spec pretty well, I was having trouble visualizing an example in my head. And I think I noted in a couple places, like an example would be helpful here, because even when I was very familiar with the spec, I couldn't think how that would be represented. Um, and so I felt like,
Okay, then it's too dry.
yeah, exactly. But I
Also,
hear you.
the first examples that you come across, they don't have that type indication because the default is a rect node probably. So this is just a rectangle. But maybe we
Yeah, you
should
almost have to
just
think about them
should
like
add
reading
that.
from the top, right? They're going to read the spec from the top. They're going to be scrolling down. What does it look like? What does it look like? What is, oh, here's what it looks like. And they'll, kind of fixate on this first example. Um, just practically the way, oh, there's a 0.2 as well. I don't know if I caught that one in my comments.
Maybe we should add a type here, even if it's the default node type. But
mhm.
or make it an oval node.
Yeah, I thought about one thought to your point, Michael. I did have the thought that this should possibly be a more robust example rather than a minimal example. Maybe still a hello world, but maybe like a rectangle, maybe two rectangles with text in them with an arrow pointing between the two of them, and then have above this have an actual visual of that. Like
Yeah.
here's the OCIF, representation of this very simple canvas that has two rectangles, one arrow, and text. And
And we should move it even higher before file structure, just like introductory example, in part of the introduction.
yeah,
Yeah,
I would love that.
agree.
And then obviously what we'd eventually like to get to is something like this, where you can, see this, where you can see the spec and as you change it,
Yeah.
would be really nice. Um, and that's such a nice representation of it, but we'll get there. But for now, what we have is the spec file to share with people. And so let's,
So what was your idea? 2 nodes and an arrow?
yeah, I was thinking of something like this.
So also an edge relation.
Exactly. Because then you get a relation. The one thing we're not showing, and I don't think we should show, is extensions. I don't think we should bother. So it'd be something
Yeah.
like this.
Agree. Yeah, and I think this is an excellent example. Hello world.
It's
With
super
two nodes
minimal,
and
but
two
it
nodes.
represents a whole lot of things in it. Of like, there's
Yeah,
2 different visual nodes. There's an arrow node. There's a relation between the two. There's text. So you're getting the resource. Excuse me. Um, the only thing that would probably be a little bit more maximal would be like including an image. Um, here's a great poem by Wendell Berry. And yeah, I'm not saying we should do this, but another option would be this would show assets, right? In a more like hypermedia assets.
maybe.
But I do like the simple, 2 boxes and an arrow and some text. There's a
Yeah,
really nice minimal canvas.
that's where it
Do all
begins.
canvases even support images on the canvas? Does CodeFlow
Oh
canvas
no.
support images?
I support images, yes.
You do? Okay. I'm curious.
Not as easy as TLDraw probably, but you can put images on it.
Yeah. So probably just this. The funny thing is, whatever canvas that we choose to use as the image, like the snapshot, like I feel like I should make this look less like TL draw, like do what that and that, make it
We just draw it in PowerPoint and make it look really ugly.
Microsoft Visio or something. Yeah, or Keynote. I'll pull up Keynote and draw this for you, get you a visual. Okay, we're coming up on 1 o'clock. We talked about having a more robust example at the top. Michael, did you have any other comments or thoughts as you were going through the spec?
No, I think this was it for now.
Cool. All right. Well, um, I have a couple of to-dos, but Max, I don't think I have any other blockers on the PR. Oh, I did have one other question. Why did you call it 0.3-draft?
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure by now. I think I just wanted to make sure that there's no 0.3 available at some URL confusing people. So I'm on an old version already. But yeah, I renamed it now to 0.3 so that the pull request actually can be executed and then the draft
Great.
will be gone. I haven't pushed it. I just need to
Awesome.
add all these other little feedbacks.
Oh, yeah.
And on this point, I do have an idea for 0.4. We will just copy over the old spec to 0.4, and then we make a pull request putting the changes on top of it. So
Love that. That will be super helpful. But yeah, it was a pretty seamless to review. I think the other thing that the last 2 times that I've reviewed the spec and the work that you've done, Max, the thing that I was missing because of the way the PR review works, I just read from the top to the bottom. And that's not necessarily the order we want people to read the files in, right?
yeah.
So I think we almost want like a start here. You read this file first, then read these files, and then we can have that in our minds while we're writing as authors of like, oh, if you're in this file, you should have already read this file. And if you haven't, I can deep link into that file with the idea, but I'm not going to re-explain or reintroduce it because it's already been
Yeah.
introduced in this other document. So that's not your fault. The PR review process doesn't present them in a logical order, but it did remind me that if people dove into it in an unexpected order, it could be really confusing.
Yeah, but there are basically 2 documents in order. The spec should be pretty much self-contained, and then the cookbook can say, maybe you read the spec first, and then I'll explain you how to use it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, agreed.
Yeah.
Oh shoot, I forgot. I have another meeting that I have to run to, and I'm 3 minutes late for. All right, well, talk to you guys soon.
Yep.
Thanks, guys.
All right.
Bye bye.
2 weeks.
Bye
Bye.
bye.